The funeral flowers were still fresh when they decided to destroy me. I sat in my late husband's leather chair, staring out at the Sacramento River, trying to understand how the two men standing before me had any right to decide my fate. My stepsons, Sydney and Edwin, stood there with their expensive suits and synthetic sympathy, handing me a manila folder that effectively stripped me of my home, my life, and my dignity. "It's not personal, Colleen," Edwin had said, his voice dripping with false concern. "It's just that Dad always intended for the family assets to stay within the bloodline. They left me with 30 days to pack up 22 years of marriage, a mountain of medical debt, and a measly life insurance payout. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully erased me. But they didn't know about the small brass key hidden in Floyd's desk. My name is Colleen, and I am 28 years old. They say that grief makes the world lose its color, but on the morning my stepson stood in my living room, the world didn't fade. It turned entirely ice cold. The funeral flowers for my husband, Floyd, were still fresh, their heavy, sweet scent clinging to the air of the home office. Yet, before the earth above him had even settled, the two men he raised were already systematically preparing to destroy me. I sat quietly in Floyd's leather chair, the worn surface smooth beneath my trembling fingers. For 22 beautiful years, this room had been a sanctuary of warmth, planning, and shared dreams. Now, it felt like a courtroom where my fate was being decided by strangers. Sydney, Floyd's eldest son at 45, wore his father's passing like a perfectly tailored, expensive suit, an inconvenience converted into a business advantage. His steel-gray eyes swept over me with a calculated chill. Beside him stood Edwin, 3 years younger but looking weathered by passive-aggressive ambition, acting as his brother's loyal lieutenant. "Colleen," Sydney began, his voice dripping with a patronizing tone I had grown to despise. "We need to discuss some practical matters regarding the estate." "We know this is incredibly difficult," Edwin chimed in, offering a layer of synthetic sympathy that made my skin crawl. "Losing Dad so suddenly, it's been hard on all of us." It was a masterclass in hypocrisy. They spoke as if they had been the ones holding Floyd's hand through the grueling months in the hospital or making the impossible calls regarding his pain management. Instead, they had merely flown in for the funeral, Sydney from his law practice in San Francisco and Edwin from his vague consulting firm in Los Angeles. During the darkest 3 months of my life, I had been utterly alone. Sydney opened a thick manila folder on the desk with theatrical precision. "The will is explicit. The primary house here in Sacramento, valued at $850,000, and the Lake Tahoe villa go to Edwin and myself. The business assets, roughly $400,000, will be distributed between us as well." "And what about me?" I asked quietly. "Naturally, there is the $200,000 life insurance policy," Sydney replied smoothly. "But as his spouse, you are personally responsible for the remaining $180,000 in outstanding medical debt." They were leaving me with exactly $20,000 to rebuild my entire life, forcing me out of my own home in 30 days under the guise of keeping assets within the bloodline. They thought they had backed a grieving widow into a permanent corner. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Martin Morrison's 15th floor office, casting the Sacramento River in a brilliant, blinding glare. Martin had been Floyd's corporate attorney for 15 years, but today, his usual professional composure was completely gone. He took off his glasses, cleaning them for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, before leaning across the polished desk. "Colleen, I am begging you to reconsider," Martin said, his voice heavy with genuine concern. "This is a massive mistake. The will Sydney and Edwin presented. It doesn't match the man I knew. There are glaring irregularities. We can contest this in court, delay the probate process, and force them to negotiate a fair settlement." I looked down at my hands. The pressure from my stepsons had been relentless, their text messages filling my phone with urgent demands. They wanted me to sign the release forms by the end of the week. "How long would a court battle take, Martin?" I asked quietly. "Months. Possibly years," he admitted, sighing. "And what would I live on while Sydney freezes the accounts?" I replied, the exhaustion deep in my bones. They want to saddle me with $180,000 in medical bills immediately. If I fight them, I'll be bankrupt before we ever see a courtroom. I just want it to be over. Martin closed his laptop with a sharp snap. They're counting on you being too exhausted to fight, Colleen. Men don't rush through probate this quickly unless they are terrified of what you might discover. Despite his warnings, my mind was resolved. I couldn't spend the next 2 years trapped in bitterness. I went home to the quiet, echoing house that would soon no longer be mine, determined to pack up 22 years of memories in the 30 days I had left. I began with Floyd's study, carefully wrapping his first edition novels. When I reached his heavy oak desk, I pulled open the small bottom drawer where he kept his private belongings. Tucked beneath a stack of old business cards, my fingers brushed against a heavy object. It was an old brass key, worn smooth from years of handling. Next to it lay a small, understated business card for First National Bank on J Street. Flipping it over, I saw Floyd's familiar handwriting on the back, listing a single 3-digit number, 379. The air inside the vault of First National Bank was cool and smelled faintly of old paper and heavy metal. The bank manager, Patricia, walked with soft steps down the row of polished steel deposit boxes until she stopped right in front of number 379. She gave me a sympathetic smile, turned her key alongside mine, and then stepped out of the room to grant me complete privacy. My hands shook as I lifted the heavy metal container onto the viewing table. I didn't know what I expected to find inside, but the sheer volume of documents waiting for me made my breath catch in my throat. At the very top lay a thick folder labeled Private Investigation, Confidential. I opened it, and the face of my oldest stepson, Sidney, stared back at me from a collection of surveillance photographs. The timestamps showed he had spent the last year making secret, frequent trips to high-stakes casinos in Reno. According to the investigators' detailed financial summary, Sidney was drowning in over $230,000 of gambling debt. Right beneath his file was Edwin's. The documents proved his vague consulting firm was actually a failing front for fraudulent investment schemes, leaving him running from angry clients to whom he owed nearly $300,000. My heart hammered against my ribs as I dug deeper into the box. I uncovered a printed email exchange between Sidney and a corporate fixer dated 8 months ago, right when Floyd first fell ill. "Colleen won't be a problem," Sidney had written. "She doesn't understand the business side, and by the time she figures out what's happening, it'll be too late. Dad trusts us completely." They had been planning to strip me of everything while I was sleeping in a plastic hospital chair next to their dying father. But the biggest shock was a recent bank statement for an entity called Whitaker Holdings LLC, an account my stepsons knew absolutely nothing about. The bottom line practically glowed in the dim vault light, $4.7 million. Alongside it sat a certified medical report from an independent neurologist confirming Floyd had remained in perfect, sharp cognitive health until his final breath. And there, resting at the very bottom of the box, was a legal document dated just 6 weeks before his passing. It wasn't a draft. It was Floyd's true, legally binding final will, officially witnessed and sealed by a completely different law firm. They hadn't defeated me. They had simply walked directly into a trap. Resting beneath the heavy stack of legal documents was a crisp, white envelope addressed to me in Floyd's sharp, distinctive handwriting. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal and unfolded the pages. "My dearest Colleen," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and the boys have shown their true colors. I am so deeply sorry I had to keep these secrets from you, but I needed absolute legal certainty regarding what they were plotting behind our backs." As my eyes scanned the pages, the full brilliance of my husband's final move became clear. Floyd had known about his son's betrayal for months. He had watched them hover around his bedside, pretending to care, while secretly planning to rob the woman who had spent 22 years building his life and caring for his health. He had no intention of allowing them to destroy me. Sidney and Edwin believe they are inheriting our beautiful Sacramento home and the Lake Tahoe villa, Floyd wrote, and I could almost hear the quiet, knowing chuckle in his voice. What they do not know is that I have heavily mortgaged both properties to the absolute maximum over the past 6 months. The primary house carries a $1.2 million lien, and the villa owes $800,000 to corporate creditors. They are not inheriting wealth, Colleen. They are inheriting an absolute mountain of crushing debt. The letter explained that the millions of dollars from those loans had been safely moved into the Whitaker Holdings account, protected completely under my name. Furthermore, the life insurance policy wasn't the mere $200,000 the boys claimed. Floyd had secretly upgraded it to a massive $500,000 payout, with an additional $300,000 policy hidden away with his new legal team. The final paragraph brought warm tears to my eyes. They made their choices, Colleen. Now, they must live with the consequences. Take the money, start fresh, and never look back. Love always, Floyd. Attached to the bottom was a crisp business card for Mitchell and Associates. Floyd had left his sons a devastating poison pill disguised as a golden opportunity, and he had given me the power to watch them swallow it. That evening, I drove out to Edwin and Bianca's sprawling estate in Granite Bay, a home built entirely on the fragile foundation of borrowed luxury. Walking inside, I was greeted with an absolute masterclass in superficial charm. Bianca, dressed in a lavish designer gown, instantly pulled me into a hollow, practiced hug, while Sydney stood by the fireplace swirling an expensive scotch. They moved around me like vultures masquerading as protectors, offering premium wine and serving an elaborate dinner, all while trying to maintain the facade of a grieving family. "So, Colleen," Sydney said smoothly as we settled into the main course, his eyes tracking my every movement. "Martin Morrison called us this afternoon. He mentioned you're finally ready to move forward with the estate transfer. We think that's incredibly wise." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, keeping my face perfectly neutral. Yes. I've realized that fighting over money isn't how I want to spend my remaining years. Family harmony matters much more to me than material wealth. A wave of visible, almost comical relief washed over Edwin's face. He nodded vigorously, raising his glass. "That's wonderful, Colleen. Truly. Dad would be so incredibly proud to know we're wrapping things up smoothly." "Of course," I continued, dropping the first piece of bait onto the table. "Though I must admit, I've been a bit confused while packing. I keep finding odd financial documents in Floyd's desk. Bank statements for accounts I've never heard of and even a heavy brass safety deposit box key. I suppose I should look into those before I sign." The temperature in the room plummeted instantly. Sydney's hand froze midair, and the color rapidly drained from Edwin's cheeks. "Mother," Sydney said, his voice straining under the sudden panic. "You shouldn't stress yourself with complex paperwork. Legal files can be terribly confusing without a business background. Why don't you bring everything you found to Martin's office tomorrow morning? We can finalize the transfer papers and handle those messy details for you." I smiled warmly at them, the exact image of a clueless, compliant widow. "That is incredibly sweet of you boys. I'll see you at the firm first thing in the morning." The conference room at Morrison and Associates was suffocatingly quiet. Sydney and Edwin sat rigidly on one side of the massive mahogany table, their expressions a mix of tight anxiety and forced confidence. Martin Morrison sat at the head, looking deeply unsettled. I took my seat opposite my stepsons, but I wasn't alone. Sitting right beside me was James Mitchell, the sharp, imposing attorney Floyd had secretly hired months before his passing. A heavy leather briefcase rested securely at his feet. "Colleen," Sydney began quickly, leaning forward to assert control. "We're glad you're here, but we need to clear up some severe misunderstandings before we sign the final papers. We heard rumors that someone has been trying to confuse you with fraudulent documents." "There are no misunderstandings, Sydney," I replied, my voice completely steady. Before he could speak, James Mitchell opened his briefcase and laid a thick stack of papers onto the table. "My name is James Mitchell, and I represent the actual estate of Floyd Whitaker. The will you have been using to pressure Mrs. Whitaker is completely invalid, superseded by a final version executed 6 weeks before his death." Edwin made a faint, choking sound as Mitchell spread out the evidence. "Furthermore, we have the complete files from a private investigation your father commissioned. We have full documentation of your gambling debts, Sydney, and the fraudulent shell companies you set up, Edwin. We also have records of your forged signatures on corporate loans and the taped conversations where you plotted to rob your father while he lay dying. The color left Sydney's face entirely, turning a sickly shade of gray. Martin Morrison stared at the documents in absolute horror, realizing he had been used as a pawn by the brothers. "This is blackmail," Sydney hissed, his hands shaking as he looked at the evidence. "You can't do this to us. We are family, Colleen. We loved him." "Family?" I asked, looking him dead in the eye. "Like the way you gave me 30 days to leave my home? The way you tried to saddle me with $180,000 in debt while taking millions?" I slid a new set of legal papers across the table. "This is a gift deed. I am officially giving you exactly what you wanted, the Sacramento house and the Lake Tahoe villa. However, the mortgages transfer with them. You are inheriting $1.6 million in property, but $2 million in immediate debt. You have 30 days to pay it, or you face total foreclosure." Sydney grabbed the papers, his eyes wide with terror. "And if we refuse to sign? Then I immediately hand these files to the district attorney," I said coldly. "And you both go to prison for grand larceny, wire fraud, and elder abuse. The choice is yours." Without another word, they signed. 3 months later, the chaotic noise of legal battles and family betrayal had completely faded, replaced by the rhythmic, soothing crash of waves against the shore. I sold the remaining business interests and relocated to a breathtaking, sunlit cottage in Carmel by the Sea, overlooking the vast Pacific Ocean. The home was purchased entirely in cash, leaving me with a secure financial foundation that would easily last for several lifetimes. Through my new legal team, I received updates on my stepsons. Unable to refinance the massive mortgages due to their terrible credit histories, Sydney and Edwin lost both properties to foreclosure. Sydney ultimately filed for bankruptcy, while Edwin moved back into his mother's spare room, working late nights just to stay ahead of his creditors. Bianca filed for divorce within weeks of the financial collapse. Sometimes, as the evening fog rolled gently over my front garden, I would look out at the horizon and think of Floyd. I knew with absolute certainty that he would have smiled at how the story ended. He hadn't just left me money. He had given me back my agency, showing me that I possessed a quiet strength I had ignored for far too long. My peaceful routine took a meaningful turn when Sarah Mitchell, the daughter of my attorney James, visited my cottage. She explained her extensive work with vulnerable individuals who had survived severe emotional manipulation and financial exploitation within their own homes. Listening to her speak, the final piece of my new life clicked perfectly into place. I realized my experience wasn't meant to be hidden away in a pretty coastal town. Using the resources Floyd had secured for me, I officially established the Floyd Whitaker Foundation for Financial Justice. We now provide dedicated legal protection, investigative resources, and comprehensive education for individuals facing corporate and familial deceit. The scared, isolated woman who sat in that Sacramento office is gone forever. In her place stands someone dedicated to ensuring that greed never gets the final word, turning a painful betrayal into a lasting shield for others.